Hi class, today we will be discussing the best way to analyse a source. Analysing a source is an important step in historical practice and offers historians a plethora of information about past societies and eras. Without sources, historians would be a little lost when it comes to discussing the past. Here are a few things that you will have learnt by the end of this video. First, the importance of sources to a historian, the different types of sources, and the steps involved in analysing a source. So first of all, what is the importance of sources to a historian? Sources act as a historical clue of the past. They act as a window that we can look through to see the nature of past people and societies. Sources help to substantiate the experiences of certain people. While relying on word of mouth may be sufficient for some, for historians, having physical sources that corroborate these experiences can help to build greater knowledge. Now, different types of sources exist, but the most important difference between sources is whether they are primary or secondary sources. Here is a tip to help you remember the difference between primary and secondary sources. When you were younger, you were in primary school, but now you are in secondary or high school. Thus, we should always remember that primary sources come before secondary sources, as this is true for your time at school. Primary sources are direct from an event or original source, for example, a diary written during World War I. And secondary sources are anything written about something that isn't the primary account of whatever the source is referencing, such as textbooks discussing World War I. Now we know the difference between a primary and secondary source, we should also remember that sources can come in a variety of different forms. For example, primary sources can come in written works, poems, diaries, court records, interviews, surveys, and original research or fieldwork. Or they can be research published in scholarly academic journals. Secondary sources can be reference materials, as in dictionaries, encyclopedias, or textbooks, or books and articles that interpret, review, or synthesize original research or fieldwork. Now class, let's move on to the steps involved in analysing a source. Analysing a source is necessary to determine what we can gather from it. An acronym that can help you to remember how to extract information from a source is this: PRU, or Perspective, Reliability, and Usefulness. Perspective and reliability are closely tied to one another, as often the perspective of a source indicates its reliability. So, perspective is all about background. Where did the source come from? Who wrote it or made it, etc. To assess the reliability of a source, you need to consider the author's perspective and a few other things as well. Is the author of the source an eyewitness to the events being discussed? Is he or she a participant? Is he or she an authority? Then you would need to consider whether being an eyewitness would add to the source's reliability because the author has direct knowledge of events, or would it be unreliable due to the author's possible emotional involvement in the events. Other issues of perspective can involve consideration on an author's stance. Is the reliability of the source affected by the author's national, political, cultural, religious, personal, or social stance on an issue? Further, the audience should also be considered. For whom has the source been produced? Is it for public consumption or for private eyes only? Closely connected to the audience is the author's motive. Has the source been produced to manipulate an audience? Is it a piece of propaganda? Is this author trying to convince the audience of something? Context is also another facet of source analysis that we should consider. What was happening when this source was produced? Corroboration also helps to enhance the reliability of a source. If someone describes an event in a diary that is similarly described in a poem about that same event, then the reliability increases. Finally, secondary sources often prove more reliable despite not being first-hand evidence, as issues of hindsight, emotional detachment, the availability of sources, and the need to satisfy a critical audience all combine to add a secondary source's likely reliability. Now finally, U for usefulness. Usefulness refers to what the source is actually telling us. What is the content of the source? How useful would it be to a historian studying a certain event? Now in class we will be looking at this source, a piece of propaganda from World War I in Australia. But I want you all to consider what we have just discussed. Is this source a primary or secondary source? What is the creator or author's perspective? What is the creator or author's motive? What is the creator or author's stance? Who is the audience? What is the context? Can it be corroborated? Finally, I want you to think about how useful would this source be to someone who is studying World War I. Thank you for your time.